and take it away.
All right. Well, thanks for showing up, everybody. I'm going to save some time at the end for questions. So, oops, I'm giving away my. So I'm going to start out with Delavan, just because you're in Delavan, at least I think some of you might be. And I grew up in Illinois, and you went to Boy Scout camp up at by Wild Rose, and love Wisconsin, love going up to Fort Atkinson and a little cafe called the Cafe Carp, which is they have great music there. I'm sure they've been hampered by the current situation, but I've been to Delavan. I've photographed in Delavan. It's got such a great history with the circus, and so many state officials have come out of there. It's a great city, so I wanted to connect to that a little bit. So I do. A little part of me would like to live in Wisconsin. Well, more than if I could live a bunch of different places, Wisconsin would be one of them. Let's put it that way. My wife is from Utah. I currently live out here. I'm going to talk to you about 3 different projects, just briefly about the first 2, and then spend the most of the time talking about the project Michelle mentioned I did with Paolo Nespoli, an Italian astronaut, to document the interior of the International Space Station. The first project, though, and how I kind of got into all this, I was teaching photography at the community college, Brevard Community College, which served the Space Coast of Florida, located in Cocoa, Florida, about 15 miles from the Space Center. The majority of my students worked out there. It was we were heavily influenced each other. And one day I got a call from an engineer out on Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. And there was an old office building that they were remodeling and hadn't been used in quite a few years. And he said, we found a photo lab we didn't really know was here. Well, there's a bunch of chemicals. He said, if you can use them at the college, you can have them. And if you'd help me dispose of them properly, then I'd appreciate it. So I went out there, in the course of that operation, he took me to one of the old pads, the Gemini launch pad, Complex 19, and it was surrounded by fence and all just rusting away. There was just nothing, nothing going on. It had been sitting idle since the late 1960s, and this was in 1988. And as soon as I saw that, I thought that, this is something that someone should really take a look at and should document, mainly because it was a great example of how we kind of let our history go. I mean, this was, where we started leaving the planet to go into space, these launch complexes. And so I got this idea to do a project photographing them, and they stencil the term abandoned in place or abandoned in place on a lot of these facilities to designate that they're not going to be utilized anymore. So if they get inspected by somebody, they don't wonder why these things are rusting away. And it was such a perfect double entendre for what happened to that part of our space program that I thought that would be a great title for the project. So, excuse me, it's called Abandoned in Place. I did a book of those images entitled Abandoned in Place with the University of New Mexico Press. This photograph you're looking at here is a panoramic image of 3 of the 4 legs of a rocket stand at Complex 34, which was where Apollo 7 launched from the first crewed Apollo mission. And it was also where the Apollo 1 fire took place, where Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee perished inside an Apollo capsule up on top of an Apollo rocket, Saturn 1 rocket. And what's interesting about this is if you look at the stenciling there, it's a little hard to see, but those black channels that run down the leg were actually places they could bracket things in. And something had been bracketed, or for some reason, the L in place. There are 2 reverse shadows there that complete the upper and middle leg of an E. So it turns abandoned in place into abandoned in peace. And it was such a beautiful tribute to what happened at that spot. And these launch pads are really quite unusual. They're right along the Atlantic Ocean, and it's a very caustic atmosphere, salt water, harsh Florida sun, so the paint doesn't last. Here's a detail of the NASA famous meatball logo. This was on the Mercury Mission Control Building at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, which has since been demolished. And again, I'm always looking at things, trying to relate it to what I'm doing. So the oxidation and the water staining running down from the raised lettering looked like rocket contrails to me. So I thought that was a good metaphor. And then, you know, part of this to me, I got into photography because I love the medium. It's beautiful. You can show beautiful things through photography. I'm also a big nut about color. And so I want to make images that are important, that tell a story, but also are beautiful to look at. To me, that's what drew me into this in the first place. So this is a more abstracted approach, and that's kind of what I did through that whole project. And I've kind of carried that through to some extent with all these projects, where I approach things in both a documentary and an abstract style. I think it helps tell a fuller story. I think it also brings people in who might not be interested in the abstract things, but they'll recognize a launch pad and it might draw them in, and then they look at the other images. So it kind of connects things at a deeper level. This, as I said, this building was demolished. I know they kept, I'm sure they kept them all, but one of these meatballs, there were three, one's on display in the visitor center there at the Kennedy Space Center. This is one of the block houses at Complex. Well, there's only one at Complex. There's a whole row of launch complexes. This is Complex 37. It was one of the furthest north, and it was an Apollo complex. There were never any crewed launches. They just tested uncrewed rockets from there. But when I was photographing out there, I started seeing things that reminded me of other archaeological sites. This, for example, reminds me of pyramids. And so I started looking for those kind of things. Along with that, again, as I said, the art part of it was really important to me. So that is really a white or slightly off-white concrete building, but I photographed this right at sunrise to get the warm light of the sun. When it comes through the atmosphere, it filters out a lot of the blue light. And you get the blue and orange complementary colors, which kind of vibrate off of each other. And then the other thing that was really interesting about photographing out there was, it took me a long time to figure this out, but because the light right at sunrise reflects off the ocean, if it's calm enough and clear enough, you get a really unusual kind of light there that you get. I've seen photographs from Cape Cod that are that way. I know there's other places, but it's a really unique quality of light. So I was always trying to capture that as well. Here's another photograph. This is back out of Complex 34, the first where the first photo was from. And again, this to me looked like some sort of Greek or Roman ruin. This was actually a cableway that ran from the blockhouse to control rooms underneath the pad. So there would have been communications cables and things running along this alleyway, for lack of a better term. And the underground section is just behind me, and then it goes off to the distance. But you can see it's all overgrown, and they'd come in and clear these out every year or so. And within 6 months or a year, they'd be all overgrown again. The Florida, again, the climate, things just grow like crazy. And then this is out at White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. This was where they started testing the V-2 rockets that were captured during World War II, until they dropped one in a cemetery in Juarez, Mexico, and they decided they better move things to a safer spot, which is why they went over to Cape Canaveral. But very different climate. That launch tower, most of at this point in time, since I did the photography, almost all, if not all of the steel structures from those original pads are gone. So they've taken down the majority of those things. And now they used to leave them stand for quite a while. And now when a program ends, they demolish them within a few years. I've been lucky enough to get out and photograph before and during the demolition, in some cases after. But I started photographing at complexes and wind tunnels and rocket engine test stands all over the country through that, being exposed to the pads at Cape Canaveral to start with. And then that led me to, one more picture. I always forget I have this one in here. So this is that Gemini complex that I first saw. And the picture on the left is from 1991. And the picture on the right is from 2005. And on the left, you can see you're actually looking opposite ways. You're looking this is an unusual service tower. So the tower that would be up around the rocket when they were preparing to launch it and putting the astronauts in. They would lay it down. It was hinged at the base and they would lay it down. So I'm standing at the hinged end on the left photograph and you see the white panels. That's the white room where they would insert the astronauts into the Gemini capsule. And then the other side, I'm looking back the other way and those arms sticking up are the hold on arms for the rocket, the Titan rocket. But you can see how much had rusted away in those 15 years. And about 8 years after I took the picture on the right, they just completely scrapped that whole structure because it was just literally crumbling apart. So this brought me to photographing then the space shuttle. About 2008, I realized that we're going to end the space shuttle program. And I'd been photographing some launches and things up along the way as I could when I lived down there. But I realized if I wanted to capture that, I better get going on it. So I put a proposal into NASA, and because I'd done the abandoned place work, they allowed me to do some special photography. And again, I approached it in the same way. So this picture is the tail end of Space Shuttle Discovery, actually shortly before they shipped it off to Washington, D.C. to Dulles to the Udvar-Hazy Smithsonian Center, where it's on display now. But one of the things I wanted to show in this photography was the damage, the wear and tear, what these things went through. They flew millions, over 100 million miles. And it's a little hard to see in this small picture, but the white tiles up near the top, they're all cracked and chipped and burned. And that's the way it flew the last time. It looked at pretty much just like that the last time they launched it. So they weren't concerned about cosmetics. They wanted to make sure it was safe, but as long as it was safe, they let it go. And the bright white over to the upper right there is the tail cone they add on when they fly it on the back of the 747 that covers the engines. Another picture. This demonstrates something that was important to me. I wanted people to see things they wouldn't normally see. I did take a lot of more standard pictures of the shuttles on the launch pad and things like that because they're just beautiful. They're stunning. You can't really stop yourself. And they, again, tell that documentary story. But I didn't realize till I took this picture how much texture was that's the tip of the solid rocket booster called the frustum, and then the top of the external tank on the left there. And again, playing the orange off the blue sky, another kind of color theory approach to this. So I'm always trying to tie in several different levels because I believe that if you can work on different levels like that, you're going to reach a broader audience. You'll notice that my titles, A, are very long and B, are very geographic or very just flatly descriptive. I like to let people as much as possible get what they can get out of it from their experience. Let them bring their experience into viewing an image. And if I gave it a romantic title or a subjective title, I'm always concerned that I'm going to slant that experience, and I don't want that. And I'm sure on some level, the very kind of mundane descriptive ones slant it, so you can't really get away with it from it, but I think it does a little bit less. So this, let me go back real quick. So in this one, I'm using light to really show the form and the texture. So because light creates and destroys form, and here it's really creating that three-dimensional shape and the texture on this. This is the opposite of that. This is the Space Shuttle Discovery. I'm on a catwalk in the vehicle assembly building, Discovery is sitting on its wheels on the floor in one of the bays, but you're really looking at a complex curved surface. And what I've done with the lighting, I mean, I'd shot all this with available light, but I found the lighting, put it that way, to flatten it all out. So, if you didn't have that Discovery label there, you can almost imagine you were flying over snow-covered fields with some retention ponds or something. It becomes this almost as a landscape or aerial photograph. And again, that was important to me to get that. I like the composition. I also think it describes the tile and the blankets that they use, the heat-resistant tile and blankets. Here, this is inside of the airlock inside of Discovery, looking actually straight up. So this is where they would have docked to the International Space Station. And again, same thing, the colors, it's primary colors, red, blue, and yellow for the most part, mostly neutral really, but the colorful parts, playing off that and describing what that looked like. And there's Velcro everywhere, so you'll see that on the interior photographs. And that brings me to the interior space project. So I'll get into how this all came about, but I actually got to start photographing the space station long before the idea for this ever existed. In 1998, I was able to get into the clean room where they were preparing the pieces of the space station for launch and photograph. And this is one of 3 pressurized mating adapters. This is PMA3. And these are used to attach different modules together or used for docking different spacecraft at the station. And of course, they had this thing, it's on a big yellow stand, and they had this big scaffolding in front of it. And first I was like, oh, I want to get up close and photograph that. And then my art history kicked in and I realized it had the flavor of a Pierre Mondrian painting, if you're familiar with his abstract compositions that are very geometric and using very bright, saturated primary colors. So suddenly I realized, oh no, this is going to make it a better photograph. And again, bring it in. I'm describing it, but I'm also bringing in other aspects that I think help tell that story and make it a more interesting image. This is the Z1 truss. So there's a very long truss that runs the length of the station that everything is mounted to. And this is the central piece. It was the largest milled object from this type of metal. I can't remember if it's a special kind of aluminum, but it was milled from one piece of ingot, basically. So an exceptional object all on its own, and it's really the heart of that structural part of the station. When I'm photographing in these industrial settings, there's often all kinds of different lighting, sodium vapor, mercury vapor, who knows what kind of lights they would have, and a mixture of them. So I spent a lot of time color correcting it. My goal with this project overall for the space station is to have it be like what it would look like if you were there seeing it. And if you were there, you wouldn't notice the different colors of light for the most part. Our eye adapts really quickly to it. So you wouldn't really notice that. It would look like this to you. And the same thing is true inside the station when we get to that point. I also photographed one of the testing facilities at Huntsville Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama. This is simply mock-ups of modules that they would use to test, for example, water recovery, HVAC. These are the people that invented the famous turning the astronauts' urine back into drinking water. So again, here's an overview shot of that facility. I'm up on a catwalk way above it in the rafters, basically. Here's the inside of one of the facilities, the internal active thermal control simulator module. Again, really, really long title. and the environmental control and life support systems test facility. So you're looking down the length of it. This module has been dismantled and is gone now. They're no longer, whatever they were testing, and then they're testing in another fashion at this point. But very bare bones, nothing like what the station looked like, but they need to, work out all these issues. And they continued testing these things even after the station was in orbit. So in 1999, when I was teaching in Florida, I got a call on my work voicemail from Katie Coleman, who's an astronaut. She was at the Space Center, and I had about 30 of my abandoned in place photographs on display in the crew quarters. And she just liked them and took the time to look me up and get my number and call me and just tell me how much her husband is a glass artist. And so she just said, the arts are important to us. I just want to let you know how much I like it. Of course, I was at a conference. And so when I got back, I called out there and she was already gone. So that was 1999. Fast forward to 2014, I never really caught up with her. They were launching the first Orion capsule on a Delta IV Heavy rocket, and it was just the capsule that no one was going to be in it, but NASA sent 4 astronauts down to meet with the press and talk to them, and Katie was one of them. And so I waited till all the activities were done and the press hubbub had died down. And then I went up and introduced myself. And she remembered me, she remembered the work, and she said, boy, I wish there was a way we could get your photographic approach, kind of your photographic vision, to work with the astronauts on the space station. And then she said, think about how you do that. What do you think about that? I said, okay, I'll, twist my arm, but it seemed, ridiculously pie in the sky. But I thought, all right, well, I don't talk to astronauts every day, and no one's ever asked me to do anything, so I'm going to go for it. So I did. And I put together a proposal, and Katie really liked it. But she said, the only way we're going to get this to work is if we hook you up with an astronaut who's going to be going to space. And she said, I have just the person. I was on the station with her for 5 months. His name is Paolo Nespoli. He's an Italian astronaut. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, And so she connected me with Paolo. And here's Paolo actually photographing for our project. And he called me, and she's just a really wonderful, warm person, brilliant, but very, and I hate to use the term, down to earth, but he's not really full of himself at all, that I can tell. And he called me and we talked, and one of the first things he said to me, which made me realize he would get the project right out of the gate, was he said, we should be sending artists and writers and theologians and philosophers and dancers into space so that they can interpret the experience. He said, but right now that's just not feasible. It's too expensive. We have to do the serious research that we do. And I understood where that was coming from, but it showed me that he got it. And so we talked for a while about the project, and I had this whole kind of complex proposal to do it in real time, where you cast an image back to Earth and I direct an astronaut in real time. And he said, very as politely as he could, he said, yeah, but he said, that's all technically possible. But he basically said, there's no way I was going to get the resources, most importantly, the astronaut time, working through mission control to do something like that. He said it, and literally my heart sank. I thought, okay. But then he said, he goes, I think this is a really good idea, and I'm willing to do it on my personal time. And he said, why don't we just email the images back and forth instead of doing it real time? And as it turned out, I expected to get maybe an hour, maybe 2 at the most in the way I proposed. So I got, I don't know how many hours, but a lot more than we had proposed. So we got a lot more photographs and did a much bigger project, thanks to his generosity. One of the goals I had, though, is this picture is taken with a flash. So if you see he's lit well, I've adjusted it some. This upper left panel here was really washed out. I've toned it down. But as you go farther and farther back, it gets darker and darker. And that's what happens with an on-camera flash. It really doesn't show things at a depth. So the picture here on the right is a similar view, a little closer up. As you look there, you can see farther and farther back. That was shot with available light. So that was one of my goals with this project. The problem is you're in a weightless environment. So normally if you want to shoot with available light in a low light situation like the space station is, you just put the camera on a tripod and do a longer exposure. But that won't work in a weightless environment. The tripod will just float away. So I expected he'd shoot at a higher film speed, which would cause the image to be more grainy or more noisy, but I was willing to live with that and work it out. But when I got the first batch of photographs, Paolo had figured out, and I'll go back, and if you can see, but he had gone and figured out a way to take there are these little armatures everywhere. You'll see them around. They use them to attach all kinds of things, mostly computers, cameras. He figured out a way to attach 2 of them to a camera, and that was enough to stabilize it. Uh-oh. Am I still there, Michelle?
You are still
I
here.
got some weird message that I'm signed out because I'm signed on another device. Oh, I wonder, that's weird. I don't know what that was. I'm still on. Sorry, that scared me.
It's all right. You're still here.
My wife shares my account, but she shouldn't be on anything right now. Weird. It was very odd. Panic sets in. Anyway, so my proposal consisted of 3 things. One was to just look at as many photographs as I could of the space station and get familiar with it, and also see what was already being done, because it seemed like there was no point to do what astronauts were already doing. And the majority of the photographs they take are out the windows, which I would have loved to do, but they're doing a perfectly acceptable and way more than acceptable job of making beautiful images of Earth. So I would have loved to have just based it around that, but it wouldn't have served much of a purpose other than for me to really have some fun making photographs out the window. And I wouldn't have been able to see what was there. So it would have been, pointless on a lot of levels. So I did that. I probably spent 150 hours just looking at every image I could find of the interior of the station. And then the second part of my proposal was to photograph the mock-ups. There's 2 mock-ups at the Johnson Space Center. The main one I wanted to photograph is called the Space Vehicle Mock-up Facility. And it is laid out exactly like the station is. The modules are separated so you can get in and out of each module, but they're laid out in the exact pattern they are. They're to the same size, the same lighting. That way I could try different focal length lenses and try to work with the lighting and see what I needed to do. And I also wanted to document them as part of the project because they're an important part of this whole space station program. The other facility is a space station training facility. That is not laid out like the station itself. There are modules, but they're used to train astronauts on the actual systems and equipments. This one you're looking at here, the Space Vehicle Mock-up Facility, is used to train them for emergencies like egress and fire and decompression and what do they do, where do they go. So it's very low fidelity. They have some equipment, but almost none. It's mostly just pictures behind acrylic of what's there. So this is the space station training facility. This is the cupola. So that's not really the Earth. Those are the 4 windows you can see. Those are actually all TV monitors. I'll show you from the outside in a second, but this is how they train to use the robotic arm. And it's all done in simulation. I've heard some astronauts say that in some cases, doing the real thing is actually easier than the training, which is good. Here's the outside of that. So you see the round kind of can there with you can see 4 of the monitors there. They're just stuck on there. So they simulate that. And then there's another node in that square behind there, node 3. But again, it's not laid out. It's roughly the same size, but it's not laid out at all. And one of the problems they have is because there's equipment on the floors and the ceiling, because it's weightless, you can't really put stuff on the floors and ceiling to train. So they stretch those modules out and put things on the wall just to, even though they're not where they actually would be. And Paolo said, it's really funny. After a while, you really don't, up and down does not matter at all to you. You just move in whatever direction is most efficient for you. And here's an example of the difference between the mock-up. So this is, again, the one that's on the left is laid out like the station, and the real thing. And you can see that on the left one, it's just pictures for the most part. And on the right, there's just tons of stuff there. So my original plan was to send these photographs I made to Paolo and have him recreate them. And it would have been really difficult because, I really wasn't seeing what was there much at all. I mean, the general structure, but not the details. So while I was down there photographing this, you're always escorted by public affairs people. And my escort was a guy named Dan Hewitt. And during the first day, I was there for 2 days because we had to work around training that actual astronauts were doing to get into different modules. About halfway through the first day, when he kind of really understood what I was doing, he said, we're going to release a Google Street View of the interior of the station in a couple days. He said, I can give you access to it now. And so he did, and I looked, and first I thought, oh, this is great. I can, I'll be able to see what's there. Then I realized, oh, I can make screen captures of this stuff and send them to Paolo. And so that's what we did. And the good news was they had shot that Google Street View, which, if you're familiar with it, it allows you to move down the street to different spots. And there was the same thing in the station. We couldn't get to every spot. There was a limit, there were 2 or 3 or 4 places you could stop in every module, but I could, and your eye line is fixed, and but I could give him instructions along with that to make modifications to that. So I was able to do screen captures of that and send them to him. So there's a fuller view of that. So you're in the Columbus module, which is the European module, looking through Node True, and then that white hatch in the back is the Japanese Kibo module. And the pink light is from what's casually known as the veggie experiment, but it's where they were growing lettuce at that point, and they've grown a number of different vegetables. And they can adjust the color of that light to see which type of light grows things the best. So here's an example. The photograph on the left is my Google Street View capture, and on the right is Paolo's image. And here's a close-up of Paolo's image. And things are always changing. So you can see, let me go back one. The table in the Google Street View is over on the right wall, and it moves to the left wall. So somebody moved it in that few months that was going on. So I had to do a lot of adjusting on these images because I was sending Paolo these street views, and they were pretty wide angle, and they were so wide angle that to get the same shot, in some cases he had to put the camera right up against the opposite bulkhead or the opposite wall, so he couldn't always see exactly what he was getting. So this is an example of what kind of the plain image I would get would look like, and then I would adjust it, straighten things out, adjust the tonality so you can see better. Again, I wanted it to look like it would look if you were there. And I wanted, because the station is laid out so formally, I wanted it very formal lines. Ironically, though, it's also this chaotic environment where there are cables and computers and cargo stuck. You can see the cargo stuck down. That's actually over a hatch that could be attached to another module. It's not being used. That's why they store stuff. But they just stick stuff wherever they can. Here's the kind of the opposite view I showed you from the Columbus looking to Kibo. This is looking at that back wall. And again, you just see how much stuff is there. And they have these express racks. So on the right, there's parts of one and then 2 other ones, which is the human research facility, which they have a blood centrifuge, and they do a lot of the medical testing there. just, they have stuff just stuck everywhere. So I always laugh when you look at that stuff. You think about Star Trek, and they have these beautiful pristine hallways with carpeting and great lighting, and there's just nothing there. And this this is the reality of what the space, our space exploration looks like right now. Someday I hope we get to that Star Trek version. This is the reality. This is a picture of one of the extravehicular mobility units, EMU. A lot of people refer to it as the EVA, extravehicular activity. That's the old term for it. And this is in the crew lock. There's a double airlock there, and the equipment lock. I'm sorry, this is in the equipment lock, and then to the right is the crew lock, or the left. I can't remember. So to the left, excuse me. And the interesting thing about this is Paolo had to, and I didn't tell him to do this. He turned out he was a photographer in the Italian army. He was actually special forces, but then through a whole series of things, he ended up being a photographer as well. And he really knows his stuff. So I just sent him the Google Street View version of this. So if you can see in the reflection of the helmet, you can kind of see that black spot. That's the camera that he's mounted on these armatures. But he was smart enough to put it on a timer and get all the way out of the way. So he's not in the picture. So he did some things that I didn't even instruct him to do that really made a difference. So it turned out to be a really good collaboration. I feel like it was a very equal balance in us doing what we did, because he had to respond to what was exactly there. And this is another one of the pictures I like. This is in the node 1. You're looking through into node 3, and the brown padded thing is the outside of the space toilet. Back in the back, there's kind of a gold and blue thing. That's basically a weightlifting machine for weightless environment. And then you have the food storage on the right here in the gray boxes, and there's all kinds of funny, like coffee without cream, tea, juices and ciders, hint of, and it's blank. And there's a bunch that say bonus food, because people get their own special food sent up. And then I think they also leave what they don't need for the other crews. So, and then you see all the different expedition patches. Paolo was up on expedition 52 and 53. They actually do 2 missions at a time, and crews rotate through. So they spend half the time with one crew and then half the time with another crew. There's 3 people on each crew. Here's the opposite hatch, and this is looking into that crew lock. It's actually called the Quest Joint Airlock, and then you can see the EMUs there in the front, and then the farther back there's another compartment jam full of stuff. That's actually the airlock where they would go outside the station, and they don't go out that often, so they store stuff in there until they need to go out. But up above on the hatch that's raised up is a little memorial wall to a number of different astronauts. There's several pictures of the Columbia crew. There's a picture of Ron McNair from Challenger. And there's an astronaut who died of cancer, and another woman who died in a plane crash, both of them before they got to actually fly in space. And this is the kind of stuff they don't normally show. I felt like it was important to show it, but NASA's pretty particular. This is the space station is not just a research facility, but it's the astronauts' home for 5 months. So, and they can't go anywhere. They can't go out. So they put up funny signs and things like that. And we had to, when we would get the pictures, they would send them down to NASA. They would go over to the astronaut office, and they'd review and make sure there wasn't any personal stuff they didn't want us to have. And I don't think they cut out very many pictures. I could go in and probably look at the numbers. It was very limited. And I'm actually surprised they didn't pull this out. I'm glad they didn't. And you'll see one in a minute where there's some stuff that I cut out that I think they should have found. Not a big deal. But they can't really put personal stuff up anywhere except inside their berths, which you'll see from the outside in a minute. Here's a workbench in node 2. So the nodes allow them to connect 6 different options together, either modules or pressurized mating adapters. That's why they're called nodes, because the actual modules just have connections at the ends, but the nodes have connections on all 6 sides. Just fun to see what, there's some normal stuff here like the Sharpies and the Leatherman, and just kind of what you'd find in your house in a lot of cases. One thing about this, though, everything is Velcroed down or put in a baggie or wrapped up, because if you just set stuff down, it floats away. Paolo said that's one thing it takes people a while to get used to, because you're just used to putting stuff down, it stays there. If you put something down up there, it's just going to float away. And most things collect at the air returns, so that's where they go looking first if they can't find something. This is looking a little more of a close-up view into the Quest joint airlock. Again, the EMUs up front and all that stuff stored back in the back. This is a little model of Space Shuttle Atlantis that was brought up. It's signed by a number of astronauts and some mission flight controllers. And then there's an eye chart up there and a patch from a special project that was going on at some point. I just like this because it shows you a little bit of that personality of what goes on up there. I also, when I see pictures of this part of the station, I always look for the eye chart, because it gets moved around a lot. It's usually up in that corner, but it's never in quite the same position. And that's because when astronauts get up on the station, the shape of your eye changes due to the lack of gravity. So they all pretty much wear glasses at times, which is ironic to me, because when I was a kid in the 60s, I would have loved to have been an astronaut, but I got glasses in 3rd grade. And back then, you had to be a pilot, and that meant you had to have 20/20 vision. So there was no going to space for me. And now everybody wears glasses. So it's the way it goes. This is kind of the joint between pressurized mating adapter 1 on the right, where all the white bags are stored, which leads to the Russian part of the station. We didn't photograph the Russian part of the station, not because we didn't want to, but there would have been, no pun intended, red tape that we just didn't have time to work through. But they jokingly call this spot Checkpoint Charlie, as they reference to the Checkpoint Charlie in East and West Berlin. But right in the center, there's those 8 little black squares with arrows, and there's actually silhouettes of 3 Russian spaceships and the space shuttle. And the Russian arrow points to the right and the shuttle points to the left. And those are glow in the dark things. So if there was an issue and the power was out and you had to get to your spaceship, which is where they would, if there was a depressurization or a fire or something, that's where they go, because they might have to leave. You could find your way in the dark, theoretically. It's funny though, the shuttle, this is 2017, the shuttle hadn't docked there since 2011. So, and I'm assuming they may have replaced that now with a silhouette of the Dragon capsule, since that's using the same docking area at node 2. Here's their kind of operations test. So every morning they'd all get together and figure out everything they're going to do. You can see on that computer screen kind of a timeline of things going on. There's a double sheet of paper there with lists of things. And there's some things I want to key in on these 2 spots. So I like to point out, first, I have that exact label maker myself downstairs. I feel like I have a piece of space, not literally that one, but the same model. There's like Listerine breath mint strips. There's a Leatherman. But up here, there's a little plastic bag and it's labeled Land of Misfit Toys. And there's just some plugs, it looks like, that I'm not sure what. So if something just floats by or you find something in the air vent and you don't know what it is or where it goes, you just stick it in that bag. And there's actually one on that workbench too. So I just like their little cultural reference to the Rudolph animation. And then this one down here, there's a Postit, and it says it's got some numbers and a guy's named Greg Whitney, and it has his phone numbers. Now, in this case, I've just blurred them out, but for the book and for the prints I print up, I actually changed them to a 555 and kind of distorted the numbers so they look like numbers, but you can't really tell what they are, because I didn't want anybody calling this poor guy up. Found out he's a flight controller. I thought about changing his name to Mark Watney. If you saw The Martian, you'll get that. If you didn't, but that would have been going a little too far, so we didn't do that. So here's looking down the length of the station from the end of the Destiny of the U.S. laboratory, which is one of the bigger modules, into Node 1, into PMA 3, and beyond that would be the Russian part of the station. So we're kind of at the bow of the station. There's actually Node 2 is behind Paolo here, behind where we shot this from. I was going to say behind me, but I'm not there. People ask me, did you go to the station? No, they don't. They wouldn't send me to the station. That wouldn't. Not going to happen. Here's the picture he was actually taking, in a picture of the self-portrait he made. This is their medical locker, and it's funny because that little red cross there is actually just red tape that it's all kind of beat up and pulled up. It's not, you think it'd be super high tech, but no, it's just stuff. And there's little signs taped everywhere. I'm always amazed at the combination of really, really high tech things and really, really low tech things throughout all this stuff. This is their microscope and glove box where they do a lot of the scientific research. You see a camera, a video camera up there. There's cameras everywhere. And then there's one of those articulated arms I was talking about over here that the camera is actually on. If I can find my cursor there. It was funny when I was preparing to do this, I worked with the imagery manager for the ISS, and I asked him for a list of they use Nikon cameras, and I asked him for a list of the lenses I had up there so I'd know what to tell Paul to use. And he goes, "Oh, I can send you a list." He goes, "But we have them all." I'm like, "You mean you have every single lens they make?" He's like, "Oh yeah, we have every single one. And we have multiples of some of them." He says, "But yeah, we have." I'm like, I guess I don't need a list then. Here's the Japanese module. I like this because they represent all the countries that participate in the International Space Station. So it was good to show the flags there. At the very bottom of the picture is the top of their little experiment airlock. It's not big enough for astronauts to go out, but there's a little porch out there, and they can actually slide experiments outside the station through that airlock. And there's 2 viewing ports there, which have their covers on them at that point. Here is Paolo's berth. You can see they don't really want them taking pictures inside their berth for some reason. I would have really liked to have seen what he had up in there, but the funny thing is he did this. The blue bag there is the sleeping bag that they kind of hang in. They don't really hang because they're floating, but it holds them in place. But if you look down lower, there's a red and blue thing, and it's actually a Spider-Man outfit. And I'm not sure if it was for Halloween or maybe he had Spider-Man. I need to ask him about that. I never did. But I just again, one of those fun little things. They have to keep it a little bit light because it's a very dangerous environment. There are, a lot of little things that could go wrong that would go badly very quickly. This is actually looking at the ceiling in the Destiny module. So there's stuff, like I said, everywhere. That little black box with a handle, they can control the SpaceX cargo ships with that, which I think is pretty amazing. And this is looking out of the cupola. So I said I did want to take pictures out the window, but it was not my purpose. but I figured if we showed the interior or some. So this one I like, we did a number of these. This one I like because it really shows the curvature of the Earth in a way that you don't always see it. It's not fake, and NASA doesn't fake this. The Earth really is a sphere, I promise you. And there's a little bit of detail, but this picture, which is the cover of the book, I sent Paolo the Google Street View of this, and it, there's some land and water. It's okay. It's the lighting inside of the cupola is not very good. So he used a flash to get to light this area up. And when I got this picture back, I was stunned. I think it's absolutely beautiful. It's my favorite piece from the whole project, far and away, because the patterns of the clouds are so beautiful, just intricate and varied. And the water in the right-hand window starts to turn silver from the angle of the sun being a little bit different. You can see one of the Russian spacecraft docked out there in the bottom right. It just kind of has everything. And I met up with Paolo well, we did this, he came home in the middle of December 2017. We met up at the National Trust for Historic Preservation in Washington, D.C. in February of 2018. And I asked him, that was actually the first time I met him in person. And I said, did you wait to get the cloud pattern like that? Because it's just stunning. And he said, no. He said, the cupola is one of the most popular places that people are doing photography. They're doing other stuff in there. He said, you can't dawdle. He said, you have to get in there, take the pictures and get out, because somebody's always waiting to get in there. So we just got very lucky with that. And I'm hoping at some point possibly to still do the Russian part of the station. I haven't quite figured out how to do that yet, but I haven't given up either. So I appreciate you listening to me. If you have any questions, I'll turn things back over to Michelle. I'll stop sharing here too. So we can...
Roland, I just love that. And I know everyone who's watching did as well. I have to say I have two favorite pictures. I love the one of the Cableway. It kind of looked like Roman ruins.
Yeah.
That was really cool. And of course the cupola is really cool. Can you, I have a question, and chat is open, everybody, so you can go ahead and post your chat questions or turn your mics off so you can ask as well. How do you edit your pictures? What editing software are you using?
So that's a good question. I've worked with Photoshop literally for decades. I started teaching Photoshop in 1991 with what was basically, it was Photoshop 2, but it was really Photoshop 1. So I use that for color correction and adjusting lines and kind of darkroom stuff. But so Paolo shot the first half of this stuff using the armatures and at a low film speed, a low ISO. And so they're relatively stable and relatively noise-free. But then literally his last day, he just went around with a camera and shot stuff at 1,000 ISO and handheld at like anywhere from a 1/15 of a second to a 1/2 second, and did a pretty good job. But they were noisier and they were grainier. That's the same thing. They were blurrier than the rest of them. So one of my goals was to make them all look like they were shot the same way. Again, so you're not distracted by the grain or the blur. I mean, obviously, no one wants to look at blurry pictures. So I've been using some software that actually went kind of out of business for sharpening and stuff. And so I started looking around. I found this stuff called Topaz, and they had some really good sharpening software and some really good what they call denoise software, and some really good interpolation, enlarging software that does fit, And so I did a whole bunch of the stuff, and then they came out with an artificial intelligence version, which was like a whole level better. So then I went back and I redid a whole bunch of it too. So I mean, like the cupola picture, for example, I spent like 2 weeks. The last time I did it, I literally spent about 80 hours on that, just that picture, because I had to go in and, you know, there were a lot of little issues, and I didn't add anything. Everything looks exactly like it would look, but it just required, you know, there were a number of them that I spent several days on. So it took, I probably put you know, a couple thousand hours in, and it's only, we ended up with like 135 pictures, individual images. There were multiple brackets, exposures of the same thing in some cases. But so to get a book out of that's pretty good. I mean, it was, you know, it was I was kind of pre-photographing with the Google part of it, but it was I'm still surprised. And again, if Paolo, he hadn't, you know, wanted to do it through email in his own time, we never would have gotten anywhere near that much. So
they're just spectacular. Thank you so much for sharing. Does anyone have any other questions? Feel free to chat in.
Bueller. I appreciate you guys being there. You don't feel like you have to ask questions, but little message down there.
Yep, Dory says, thank you, Roland, for sharing your pictures. This is so fascinating.
Great. Well, thank you for watching. I appreciate it.
All right. I think we're good to go then. Roland, thank you.
Thank you.
And we can't wait to see your next collaboration and your next book.
Yeah, I'm working on the space shuttle book. I'm actually working on the captions right now, so it's getting close to send it off to the publisher, see if they want to do it. So I'm excited about that one because I actually have a lot more of that than either of the other projects. So I think it's.
And where can people find your books at? I think they're at
Amazon is probably the Abandoned Place is on Amazon, and it's dropped in price. The Interior Space is full price on Amazon. I don't really understand. And the publisher's sold out already. We printed 3,000 copies and they sold out. So Amazon might have 500 copies still. I don't know, but I wouldn't imagine they have that many. So hopefully, I don't know if they're going to reprint or not, but it's up to them at this point. So we'll see.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us, and have a good evening. And we will be posting Roland's presentation on our Facebook page and YouTube as well. Everybody take care, and we are done. So thanks, Roland.
Thank you. Good to see you, Michelle.
It was good to see you too. We'll have to collaborate some other way in the future.
There you go. All right.
All right.
I started doing a project on, what did I call it? Taverns and Taps.
I saw that. Where was that?
Somebody did. No, somebody else did it. Somebody else had done it by the time they did a nice job. So,
what was the project that you're doing of the gas stations?
Oh, the Real West.
Yeah, that was the one I was thinking you were talking about.
That's the next one. I'm still working on that, and it's really nice being back out west because I try to go out about once a week and photograph for that. So that's really.
I like that one. It's very Route 66 to me.
Yeah.
You know, lots of nostalgia there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you'll have to come back and share some of that when you.
All right, we'll do that.
All right, take care. Stay safe. Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.